I've been shooting for years now, and over that time, I've usually been blindly trying to figure out what to do and how to do it. And I guess that's the same for most people. But over the years, I've made a few zines and a couple of books which have progressively got better. And I've got a pretty good understanding of what to expect when you're trying to sell your first book or zine. So I wanted to put together a full guide on how to do this. It's effectively a course on making and selling a photo book. This will be split into sections, and if you've already done one of them, then you can just skip on to the next one that's, the thing that you actually need to do. Perhaps you should save this video somewhere because you might want to refer to it in a few weeks or in a few days or whatever. It might be helpful. Okay, so whether you're making a book or a zine, it's basically the same process, except a zine is smaller like this. This is a friendship zine that I made once. It's just like a small magazine effectively. Or, if you're making a book, then it's a bit bigger. It will probably have a spine, and that's pretty much the main difference. Also with a book, it's probably going to be a bigger body of work that you've actually really put some time and effort and thought into. So if this is your first rodeo, then you might be thinking, what can I make my book or zine about? As I said, you can pretty much have your book or zine be about anything you want, but it's really helpful to have some structure and some guidelines just to, give you something, a bit of meat to the bones. I don't think that's right. You generally want a theme running through your book, so maybe it could be street photography in a specific location. It could be portraits of people that share a common goal or a trait. It could be based around a specific color, or it could be, what did I write down? A specific time of the day, all sorts of things. What's important is that it speaks to you and that it's important to you and that you actually enjoy shooting this thing. If you're just doing this thing because you think other people will like it, then you're probably not going to enjoy the process. And when you're just first making a photo book, that is definitely not something that you want. Maybe there's something specifically related to you that you could build a project around. Maybe a certain family member of yours has a really interesting job and that has inspired you to document that process. Perhaps the place you live looks particularly interesting at a specific time of day and you've decided you're going to make a project just around that time of day based around where you live. Weirdly, a theme can sort of arrive while you're shooting and you might sort of discover, oh, I've actually been shooting this thing a lot and I hadn't really noticed. So it's not really something to be rushed. It's something that can appear after the fact, or it could be predetermined before. Sometimes some people's styles can't really be tied down, and it is that lack of style that sometimes underpins the theme of a book or a zine. Some people almost shoot in a way that feels like it's almost like evidence. I don't know how to explain it in any other way, but there's some photographers that shoot like that, and it's almost this like every photo is it's a big question every time you look at a photo. It's almost like the remnants of something that's just happened. If you don't know what to make your book about, don't worry, because sometimes ideas just come to you out of the blue. On the toilet or while you're driving. It's usually something weird like that. I usually keep a notebook with me because I prefer to try to keep as much of my creative process offline, because I just think it keeps me more creative because I'm less likely to, start watching reels for an hour or something. So yeah, I get a notebook and anytime I get an idea, I just write it down. If I don't have a notebook on me, I'll send myself like a message or put it in the notes app or whatever. Just keep hold of your ideas whenever they come to you, because you can't force ideas most of the time. The last book that I made was this one from, basically just shooting in Europe for 80 days. So it wasn't an abstract concept, but it was effectively all the shots of sort of basically street photography from going around Europe. Rather than just taking pictures of the same old buildings and stuff like that, I wanted to try to shoot how this place felt. And listen, there's nothing wrong with taking pictures of the buildings of a place. You may come up with a really interesting concept of how to photograph famous things that get photographed all the time in a completely new way. So the possibilities are kind of endless. Remember, what you're bringing to the situation is your perspective, and that's photography. If you need any more inspiration about what your photo book could be about, then you should go to your local photo book store, or you should have a look online at, a big photo book seller or whatever. Take a look at what those books are about, take a look at how they're laid out and things like that. That is one of the best ways to get inspiration. Also, take a look back at some of your favorite photographers' work and their photo books, how they started from the beginning of their career and how they ended up later on in their career, how things changed. Usually, they'll have a really big variety of work, sometimes focusing on completely different subjects. So it can be a really interesting exercise to do that for sure. Often a really good way to think about things is look at someone's work that you're interested in, look at what they did, and then think, okay, based on my interests or things that maybe people in my life do, what could I do that's sort of parallel to that or lateral to that? So it's not like the same thing, but you're taking inspiration from something that has been done already. And yeah, the way you shoot is developed over a long time, so don't worry too much. It's about the process. This could be weeks down the line, this could be months down the line, this could be years down the line. But when you've got all your photos together and all that shit, it's time to work on sequencing. To be honest, I don't find sequencing that fun, but I don't know, I just guess I'd love shooting and that's kind of it. But basically, sequencing is about putting photographs together and seeing what would work side by side. And this is kind of where you realize that it takes a lot of different kinds of photographs to put together a interesting book that feels like it has a narrative. You will realize that your job isn't to put in all of your best photos. It is about creating an interesting book that makes some sense, maybe. That's what I realized when I was making my latest book. And, I don't think we always get it right, but I think along the way you realize, oh, actually, this sort of close-up picture that was a bit nothingy on its own makes loads of sense next to this other picture that's a bit more powerful. Most people get a long list of photographs printed off. I got about 300 images printed off, and basically I took it to a local store that does loads of photo printing, and they say it's like, moderately expensive to get single images done, but the more you get done, the less it costs. So in the end, I think 300 pictures cost like £35, which is definitely worth doing for sure. All you need is a small print. Mine were like maybe A5, maybe a bit smaller than A5. You could have them even smaller than that, and it would be pretty helpful actually to have them be a bit smaller. Once you've got your photos, then you can put them together side by side and look at the variations and look at what actually works next to one another. Basically, I just splay them all out on a big table, and sometimes you realize, oh, okay, this photo just doesn't work at all. I'll probably set this to the side. These are some really strong photos that I definitely want in the book. These are some good photos that might work well with the stronger photos. And it is just a case of switching them around until they feel like they make sense or they feel like they add to the narrative. There is kind of no right or wrong way with sequencing to a degree. I'm sure there are some rules that I don't actually know. So if you're in the comments, put them down there, because it'd be great for this to be a big resource for everyone to use. Of course, if you don't have real prints, you could do this online, but it's not a very easy process online. And I don't think it's anywhere near as helpful if you're doing it online. So I would advise to get them printed for sure. There's lots of things that could tie photos together. Sometimes it's color, sometimes it could be the feel of it, it could be the location of it. It really depends on how you want your book to sort of tie together. I'll be honest, this is probably the part of the process that I overthink the most, because my interpretation is completely different to what your interpretation will be of the sequencing. So the patterns or the things that I think make sense might not make sense to you. Sequencing can take a while. I think I had my photos out on my table for like 3 days or something. Some people might take a week, some people might take even longer, some people might take a few hours. It really depends on how you feel. But sometimes there comes a point where you're like, okay, maybe I'm completely overthinking this. Some people put wide shots next to detailed ones. Some people put emotional pictures next to calm ones. Some people put the same location together. It really is just part of the process and, you know, how you want your book to feel, I guess. I definitely haven't perfected this myself, and that is why photography is great, I suppose, because it is a process and it's all learning. Boy, oh boy, welcome to my least favorite part of the whole process, and that is InDesign. You can use other softwares to put your book together, and sometimes the actual provider, the printing company, will have a software that you can put your book together on. But InDesign is, one of the most professional ones, and it's a really good software to learn. But I'll be honest with you, it is pretty annoying, and it's just, I don't know. It's not a part that I enjoy. Again, I like taking the photos, and doing all this stuff feels like work. But thankfully for you, I've made a shitload of mistakes, so you don't have to make as many, I suppose. First off, it's really helpful to kind of work out what you want to do before you do it. I usually use a company called Mixam because they're really cost effective, and they're also pretty good standard of books. I'll put a link in the description. I'm not affiliated with them or anything, but I just think it'd be helpful. If you've decided what size book you want and all of that jazz, then Mixam will tell you what millimeter of bleed you'll need. And that is something that you need to know. The bleed is kind of the leeway, or like, the edge of the paper where the design may or may not go to. So if you've got an intricate design on your page, then you want it to go all the way up to the edge of your bleed. If you've put a different picture color other than white on your page, then you'll want it to go all the way up to the edge of your bleed. This is because when they're cutting the pages or whatever, or when the machine's cutting the pages, it could be a couple of mil out. And then you would end up with a little white strip on the end of your page. A lot of zines are usually A5, but again, it's totally up to you. You might think that bigger is better, but smaller is cheaper and cheaper to post, which is a really helpful thing. The cheaper it is, the more you'll be able to sell. It really is that simple, because who's got the money to put like 50 quid down on a book? My advice would be, if you're just starting out, start at about A5 and you can sell it for like £10, and it'll just be much, much easier for you. It's much less of an investment, and it won't be as heartbreaking if you don't sell as many. Also, as I said before, your postage costs will be much less, and again, just makes it much easier to sell them. But whatever you want to do, you've got to get that size in millimeters, and then also input whatever bleed Mixam tells you to do, or whichever company you're working with tells you to use. You can edit the number of pages in your book throughout. Sometimes it's a little bit confusing, but basically these are your inner pages. Then you have to do the back, front, and spine, if there is a spine, separately. Once you're in InDesign, you can basically do what you want, which could seem a bit confusing initially. As you can see, you can use your text here, which is pretty simple. But the main thing is how to get your photos onto the page and put them where you want. Usually I just use this box tool. You can make a box wherever you want and drop your image straight into it from your files. Once your pictures are in the box, you can fill the frame proportionately and your picture will go into the box properly. Here's something, if you want to do things quickly, make the boxes in the right spots, grab them both, then copy and paste them on the pages below. That way you're going to have all your boxes laid out already and you don't have to go through and make separate boxes in the right places and all that, which is a bit of a ball ache. If there's a quicker way to do this, then I have never found it. If you know, then put it in the comments. My only advice there, though, is to make sure you don't paste an image over another image. Sometimes this can produce a bit of a ghost image, which only really shows up once you've got the book printed. So just make sure the pictures on your page are the ones you want. Of course, you might want to experiment more with the size and position of your pictures so you can just do what you want, really. Along the way, if you want to see what the pages will look like without the guidelines, then you can just press Ctrl W and press it again if you want to get the guidelines back. This is kind of the basics of putting your book together. It's all pretty open for experimentation, and of course you'll be able to use all your sequencing that you've done already to work out where you want your photos. Sometimes once you've actually got them out there on InDesign, you'll realize that certain pairings actually look pretty shit and you'll move them around, and that's all part of the process. Just while it's in my head, the first page will usually be an inner page, which you'll probably want to consider keeping blank. Then the next two pages are usually pretty helpful to kind of set the book up. If you want to write about it, some people do, some people don't. You may want to just put something very simple. You may want to put something a bit more extensive. That is up to you. The last page also probably doesn't need anything on it, or you could put your website, etc. on that. It's all about what you want to do though, and every book is a bit different. Oh yeah, it's just popped in my head. If you put all your images centrally, then it can be hard to fully view your image, as it's kind of going to go into the crack, into the middle of the page, into the middle of the book. What I usually do is line them up a bit further out of the inside of the page, and that just makes them far easier to view once they're printed. Once you've got your inside done, you can save it and export it as a PDF. Make sure it's either CMYK or RGB. I would expect that it would be a CMYK file because that is how most of these places print, but just check what sort of file you actually need depending on what company you're using. Then you just need your spine and front and back cover. If you're making a zine, then it probably won't have a spine, in which case you just need your front and back cover. Mixam shows you what you'll need for a front and back cover, so just make sure you've got all the correct dimensions. If you need a spine, then you'll need to refer to the dimensions again. Your spine will be a different size depending on how many pages your book will have and how thick your paper is. So if you go through the order process on Mixam, then it'll tell you what size your spine needs to be. I think mine was about 8mm by 210mm. Once you've finished your front page, spine, and all your inner pages, then you can export them as PDFs. There'll be 3 separate files, which is absolutely fine. Now you're ready to upload them to InDesign, and this is where I'd suggest a few things. First off, you absolutely need to get a sample. Just pay for 1 copy of your book or zine. If you don't do this, then you will probably regret it. Trust me, I'm the idiot that messed this up before. Just get a sample. The sample will show you if anything is missing, if you made any mistakes, if it actually looks right in real life. All of that shit. Also, when you're uploading your files in Mixam, it'll give you the chance to check the whole thing to make sure it's exactly how you want it. Do this and look real close, because weirdly, there was an error that didn't appear on my InDesign or on my PDF, but it did show up on Mixam, so be real vigilant. So that is putting it together on InDesign and getting it onto Mixam, uploaded and all that jazz. Once you've been doing it for that long, it kind of all starts to lose meaning. So it's a really weird process. So as I said before, get a sample. Once you've done that, if you're happy, then go ahead and get it printed. If it's your first time with any kind of book, I would just suggest getting a small run. Just get like 25 books, and trust me, it is hard to sell photo books. If you don't have a big following or something like that, 25 is absolutely fine. If you run out and loads of people want them, just order another 25. And that leads me on to selling your photo book. Maybe I should have put this at the beginning, but making your photo book should be a labor of love, because you're probably not going to make loads of money off it. Now, you might think that that sounds really negative, but I actually think that being able to know that that should be your focus, you know, making it a really great piece of work that you're really happy with, rather than trying to make loads of money off it, means that you're not going to be let down when it doesn't make loads of money. But trust me, selling photo books is really hard, even for big photographers. Most people don't have that kind of expendable income. I can't remember the last time I bought a really good photo book because I don't have much money. Earning a living from photo books nowadays isn't really something that happens. You might earn part of a living from photo books, but it would be very unlikely to earn a whole living from photo books. But yeah, as I say, that's fine. If we know that, then we can have a different perspective on it. And if you intend to make loads of money off it, you're just probably in it for the wrong reasons. I try to think of it as something that brings us closer to our work, and it's also bringing our work into the physical world, which is great. I think my advice of producing like 25 books is a realistic one. And, you know, if it's your first time making a photo book, then realistically, your friends and your family are going to be pretty supportive, because they're like, oh my God, this is the first thing that you've done like this. So let's talk about pricing. I mean, it's simple, really. The cheaper the book, the more you're going to sell. It's that simple. If it's a zine, it's easier to sell it because you can make it cheaper. If it's a book, if you can make it fairly cheap but still make some profit on it, that's what I would suggest. I think we have our understanding of like what photo book prices should be a bit skewed by seeing like big photographers that sell them for like £50 plus. But when you're small, you don't have a big following, you don't have like, people don't know your name, you would really, really struggle to sell for probably more than £30. But yeah, if you want to do a zine or something like that, it probably costs like £2-3 to make. So you can make an okay amount of profit, you know, if you're selling them for £10 and adding the postage price on if you have to post them. It's really not too bad. That would definitely be my suggestion. Start small, get a feel for it. You'll understand like, okay, I sold about this many this time. Maybe if I do one in a year's time, I'll have a rough idea of how many I'll be able to sell that time. That's what I would suggest. How and where do we sell it? That's a good question. Do not underestimate your friends and family. The vast majority of your sales will probably come from them the first time you do a photo book. But otherwise, of course, use your social media. I would expect if you've got like a moderate following, then you'll probably get a few sales from people that you don't know. But the big thing that I would just start doing it now, and you will be very pleased that you started whenever you did, because it will pay off long term. Get a website and create an email list, and try and slowly but surely build that email list up. And then anytime you have a book or prints or anything like that, or you're doing an exhibition or anything, then you can email it out to everyone on that email list. You own your list. Every email goes to those people. Whereas when you put it on social media, very few people see it. You have no control over that. And finally, you can go and take your zine or book to photo book stores. If you're lucky enough to get your book into a photo book store, then that's a really cool way of getting your work out there to a new audience and getting people to know your name. I wouldn't expect to make loads of money doing this, because if you're already not making much from your zine or book, then the bookstore is going to take a commission or a cut or however they work it. So it'll be unlikely that you make much money, but it's definitely a really cool thing to get your work into a bookstore. And that's amazing. You're getting a whole new audience seeing that work. Do not be disheartened if you don't get your work into a bookstore. It's not easy. Usually it's helpful if you actually already know someone from the bookstore or something like that. You wouldn't be surprised at the amount of people that actually go there and try and get their work into bookstores, and obviously they can't put everything in there. It doesn't necessarily mean that your work's bad. It could be anything. So it's worth a try. Just be aware that your work might not go in there. That's kind of the end of it, I suppose. And hopefully this was really helpful. I wanted it to be like a pretty concise source of all the mistakes that I've made over the years. And, if I'd have had this video when I was starting out, then it would have been pretty helpful. But, as I've said throughout, I'm sure there's people that have had their own experiences as well. So if there's something that you think is valuable, put it down in the comments. That would be really cool, because then people can refer to it. But otherwise, I hope this is helpful. And just remember, it's a really big undertaking to make a book. It's not something that's going to replace your income, probably, unless you've got a massive following. But it's really enjoyable and fulfilling if you look at it as an art process rather than a money thing. Anyway, take care. Obviously, subscribe to me because I've just made this guide. And yeah, have a really good week.